The old man sat on the park bench, his hands trembling as they clutched a tattered photograph, the edges worn soft from years of quiet devotion. His eyes, clouded with age, traced the faded smile of a woman who had once been his world. The autumn wind carried the scent of damp leaves and distant wood smoke, rustling through the bare branches of Central Park, where the city's heartbeat thrummed faintly beneath the gray sky. At 78, Walter Grayson knew time was a thief. But it wasn't the years that haunted him. It was the weight of a promise he'd broken decades ago. He muttered to himself, voice barely above a whisper, "I should have told her. Just once more." An older American watching from their living room might feel the ache of those words, the sting of regrets carried too long, the kind that settle deep in the bones when life's winters grow near. Walter's life had been a quiet one, a retired accountant from Brooklyn who'd spent 40 years balancing ledgers and raising a daughter alone after his wife, Eleanor, passed. His days now were spent in this park, feeding pigeons and watching the world spin on without him. The photograph in his hands was of Eleanor on their honeymoon, her laughter frozen in time, her dark hair catching the sunlight by a lake in upstate New York. He'd promised her they'd go back every year, but life, bills, work, the grind, had stolen that vow. They'd only returned once before she got sick. That failure gnawed at him, a wound that never scarred over. Today, though, something felt different. The air was heavy, not just with the chill of November, but with a strange electricity, like the world was holding its breath. Walter tucked the photograph into his coat pocket and stood, his knees protesting as he shuffled toward the park's exit. He didn't notice the young man watching him from a nearby bench, a hoodie pulled low over his eyes, hands stuffed deep in his pockets. The kid, maybe 20, had been there every day for a week, always watching, never speaking. Walter figured he was just another city drifter, harmless but lost. He didn't know the kid's name was Marcus, or that Marcus had been following him since he'd found a letter in his mother's attic, a letter that changed everything. Marcus's heart pounded as he trailed Walter at a distance, weaving through joggers and dog walkers. The letter, crumpled and yellowed, was tucked in his backpack. It was addressed to Walter Grayson, dated 1983, and written in a woman's looping handwriting. Marcus's mother, Denise, had died 6 months ago, and while cleaning out her things, he'd found it hidden in a shoebox. The letter spoke of a secret, a child given up for adoption, a choice made in desperation. It begged Walter for forgiveness, claiming he'd never known about the baby, Marcus's older half-sister. Marcus had spent months tracking Walter down, his only lead a name and an old Brooklyn address. Now here was this old man, fragile and alone, and Marcus didn't know if he wanted to hug him or scream at him for the life his mother had endured. Walter stopped at a hot dog cart. The vendors, radio crackling with an old Sinatra tune. The smell of grilled onions and mustard hung in the air, sharp and nostalgic. Walter fumbled for change, his fingers stiff, when a voice cut through the noise. "I got it," Marcus said, stepping forward and tossing a few bills on the cart. Walter blinked, surprised, his pale blue eyes meeting Marcus's dark ones. "Don't need charity, son," Walter grumbled, but Marcus just shrugged, his face unreadable. "Not charity, just lunch." Walter took the hot dog, muttering thanks, and shuffled back to his bench. Marcus followed, sitting a few feet away, his heart racing. This was it. He had to say something, but the words stuck in his throat like broken glass. Days passed, and the pattern repeated. Marcus bought Walter coffee, a pretzel, once even a scarf when the wind turned bitter. Walter, suspicious but softening, began to talk. Small things at first, about the weather, the pigeons, the way the city had changed. Marcus listened, his anger fading into something more complicated. Walter wasn't the monster he'd imagined, just a man carrying his own ghosts. One afternoon, as snow dusted the park, Marcus finally spoke up. "You ever lose someone you couldn't save?" The question hung between them, raw and heavy. Walter froze, his breath catching. He thought of Eleanor, her frail hand in his as the hospital machines beeped their final notes. "Yeah," he whispered, voice cracking. "Every damn day." Marcus pulled the letter from his backpack, hands shaking. "This is yours," he said, thrusting it toward Walter. The old man's fingers trembled as he took it, recognizing Eleanor's handwriting instantly. His heart stopped as he read, the words slicing through 40 years of certainty. Eleanor had been pregnant when they'd met, a child from a past she'd never shared. She'd given the baby up, too ashamed to tell him, too afraid he wouldn't love her. The letter was her confession, written after her diagnosis, meant to be sent but never mailed. Walter's vision blurred with tears, his chest tightening. "I didn't know," he choked out. "I swear I didn't know." Marcus's voice was low, shaking with years of pent-up pain. "That baby was my sister. My mom raised me alone because of you." The accusation landed like a blow, and Walter's face crumpled. He saw it now, the resemblance in Marcus's eyes, the same stubborn set of Eleanor's jaw. The shock was a knife to the gut, twisting with the realization that he'd had a daughter out there, lost to him, and now a grandson he'd never known. Despair flooded him, heavy and cold, drowning out the park's distant laughter. He'd failed Eleanor, failed this boy, failed a daughter he'd never even met. Marcus stood, ready to walk away, his anger spent but unresolved. But then Walter reached out, his hand frail but steady, grabbing Marcus's sleeve. "Wait," he said, voice raw. "I can't fix the past, but I'm here now. Please." Marcus hesitated, his heart warring between rage and longing. He sat, back down, and they talked. Haltingly at first, then deeper, about Eleanor, about Denise, about the lives they'd led apart. The snow fell harder, blanketing the park in silence, and for the first time, Marcus felt the weight of his mother's pain lift, just a little. Weeks later, Walter invited Marcus to his small apartment, a cluttered space smelling of old books and coffee. On the table was a photo album, its pages filled with Eleanor's life, her smile, her quirks, her love for Walter. Marcus traced the pictures, his throat tight. Walter, watching him, felt a flicker of hope, fragile but real. Then came the twist that neither expected. A knock at the door revealed a woman in her 50s, her face a mirror of Eleanor's. It was Clara, the daughter Eleanor had given up, tracked down by Marcus's relentless searching after finding the letter. She'd been adopted, raised well, but always wondered about her roots. The room fell silent, the air thick with disbelief and joy. Walter's heart raced, his hands shaking as he reached for her. "You're here," he whispered, tears streaming. Clara nodded, her own eyes wet. "I found you." The reunion was raw, messy, beautiful. Clara spoke of her life, her children, her questions about the mother she'd never known. Marcus shared stories of Denise, his mother's strength, her regrets. Walter listened, his heart breaking and mending all at once. Then, in a moment that felt like fate, Clara pulled out a small pendant from her bag. A locket Eleanor had worn on their honeymoon lost years ago. She'd found it in a thrift shop, drawn to it without knowing why. The sight of it undid Walter, a sob escaping as he realized Eleanor's presence still lingered, tying them together. As winter deepened, Walter, Marcus, and Clara began meeting regularly, rebuilding what time had stolen. One day Marcus suggested they visit the lake from Walter's honeymoon photos. It was a quiet act of kindness, born of his growing love for the grandfather he'd once hated. They drove upstate, the car filled with the scent of pine and the hum of old songs on the radio. At the lake, Walter stood between his daughter and grandson, the water sparkling under a rare winter sun. He scattered a handful of Eleanor's ashes, kept all these years, and whispered, "We made it back, love." The wind carried his words, and Marcus squeezed his shoulder, Clara's hand in his. The moment was pure, a balm for old wounds, a promise kept at last. The story ends with them sitting by the lake, sharing stories, laughter mingling with tears. The sun sets, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, and Walter feels something he hasn't in years. Hope, bright and unshakable. A single act of kindness, Marcus's choice to reach out instead of walk away, had shattered the walls of regret and built a family from ashes. As they drive back to the city, Walter looks at Marcus and Clara, their faces lit by the dashboard's glow, and thinks, sometimes the smallest gesture can rewrite a lifetime's ending.